Hello, and welcome to this overview of the road trip trope in historical romance books. I'm Olivia, your favorite resource for book recommendations you can easily screenshot, and you're watching Random Olive Reads. So, first up, what is so special about a road trip? Now, road trip romances are a staple of historical romance. Usually, back then, it takes multiple days to travel. So, we have this forced proximity with carriage rides and sheltering at inns. Now, sometimes the gentleman will ride his horse alongside the carriage, but often there will be some turn of weather to force the gentleman inside. Now, when they stay at inns, they might require sharing rooms, pretending to be married, and possibly only one bed. And at some point, usually some calamity will befall the trip: carriage accidents, highwaymen, or storms that prevent travel. So, all these books are presented in alphabetical order by author last name. So, first up, we have To Hell and Back by Annabelle Anders. And this is book 6 of the Devilish Debutantes series. This one features the mother of one of the debutantes from earlier in the series. So Eve is informed of her estranged husband's death and needs to travel to his estate to settle the funeral and hand off the property to his heir. Now, she takes her man of business, Niles, with her for the journey, and they run into all the travel calamities you would expect in a road trip, like a carriage accident and stormy weather. Now, suddenly, she sees Niles in a new light because he's so strong and caring and protective, and their relationship adapts from their business like relationship. Now, this story is a novella length story, so it's a quick read. And if you're interested in more mature characters with adult children, this is a great one to start with. Another book with more mature characters, we have Mr. Dale and the Divorcee by Sophie Barnes. This is book 1 of the Brazen Beauties series. Back in Regency times, divorce is always a scandalous prospect. In this case, Wilhelmina has been in a marriage of convenience with her best friend for decades and wants to release him from the marriage so that he can marry his mistress. In order to do that, they have to sort of feign her adultery and give cause for the divorce, making her the most scandalous woman in England. Mr. James Dale is a widowed barrister with a strong sense of ethics. When he first meets Wilhelmina at a ball, he's instantly charmed, but then he learns that she's married and an adulteress. Now he's disgusted with himself for being attracted to her in the first place and stays away from her as much as possible. A couple of years later, when the divorce is settled, Wilhelmina and James encounter each other again when her daughter and his son are courting, and they eventually run off to elope. Both of them want to stop the elopement, so they're off on a road trip together to find the kids. Obviously, they're adults. As they're traveling, they get to know each other better, of course, and suddenly James is questioning what he knows about women and about Wilhelmina. And Wilhelmina is not able to tell James the truth of her divorce because the charges were basically fraudulent and she doesn't want to get into any legal trouble, etc. It is nice to see them slowly start to trust each other after that time together, which is the beauty of the road trip. If I Only Had a Duke by Lenora Bell is book 2 of the Disgraceful Duke series. We have Thea, who is otherwise known as Lady Dorothea Beaumont, was left at the altar when the groom picked her sister instead. She wants to escape the London scene and retreat to her aunt's house in Ireland. However, she's horribly awkward and unwillingly becomes popular after being asked to dance by Dalton. Dalton, who is the Duke of Osborne, is actually a secret vigilante looking for the man who killed his brother. So his cover story is that he's a shameless rake, but obviously he's not. Thea blames Dalton for her sudden popularity and insists that he fix the problem by taking her with him on his journey to Ireland. The escapade that outwardly looks like it'll compromise them probably actually does. Overall, we have a socially awkward heroine not looking to marry, a secret crime fighting hero dealing with a lifetime of guilt, and the almighty road trip. A Week to Be Wicked by Tessa Dare is book 2 of the Spindle Cove series. We have Minerva, our geological scientist here, aiming to go to a scientific conference in Scotland with a fossil imprint of possibly a lizard or a dinosaur skull in tow. Except she doesn't have a way to get there. She propositions the town rake, Colin, to fake an elopement with her and escort her to the conference. From there, we face all the classic road trip calamities, broken carriage, highwaymen, and more. And there's a super cute bit where Colin calls Minerva every other M name under the sun because he can't remember her name, but he actually does know her name. This is one of my favorite books from Tessa Dare. Bride by Mistake by Anne Gracie is book 5 of the Devil Rider series. So, 8 years ago, Luke had rescued a young girl from the Spanish roadside and delivered her to a convent, and then he married her for her own protection. Now he has found he cannot get an annulment from her, so he's returned to Spain to claim her and collect her. Before they leave, she needs to visit her hometown to find her younger illegitimate sister. So there's a lot of road trip travel along the Spanish countryside. Both Isabella and Luke have lingering traumas from the war and have a lot of trouble communicating with each other. It was nice to see a road trip in a different setting here, and then we uncover a few more mysteries from Isabella's past. The Highlander's Accidental Marriage by Callie Hutton is book 6 of the Marriage Mart Mayhem series. So, Lady Sarah is on the road to see her twin sister Sybil in Scotland and runs into all the tragedies along the way. In a carriage accident, she loses her driver and footman. She's rescued by Professor Braden, who is also on his way home, which is the neighboring property to Sarah's sister. Sarah's maid and chaperone then falls ill, and they have to leave her behind to continue the journey. Now, they're already in Scotland, and at one inn, Sarah declares herself married to Braden so they can reserve the last room available for the night. Unfortunately, in Scotland, that counts as being legally married. So while these two are obviously attracted to each other, they had no intentions whatsoever of getting married anytime soon. Sarah has her own goals. She's about to be a published novelist and has obligations in London. Braden has his goals. He's waiting for an opportunity to go on a scholarly expedition in Rome. Both people are terribly stubborn. They think their own individual pursuits are more important than their accidental spouse. So there is a lot of conflict here that needs to be resolving. Lord Holt Takes a Bride by VIVIENNE LORRET is book 1 of the Mating Habits of Scoundrels series. Now, this series revolves around a female friend group. They found one of their own ruined and banished to the countryside, so they want to do some research to avoid rakes and scoundrels. They somehow kidnap Lord Holt so they can question him about his habits. Also, in the background, while he's blindfolded, one of them is complaining about not wanting to marry the oaf that her parents picked out. Now, at some point, Winifred has run away from that wedding she doesn't want and into a waiting carriage. That carriage contains a certain Lord Holt, otherwise known as Asher, and off they go to run away from London and her unwanted wedding. There is some drama here involving ransom and whether Asher was an unwilling participant in the road trip, but all of these circumstances obviously have pushed them together. Heartbreaker by Sarah MacLean is book 2 of the Hell's Bell series. This one has a starchy duke and a criminal's daughter. Adelaide is one of our belles, part of an underground Victorian girl gang network, and she is tasked with protecting a young lady who witnessed a murder. Before she can catch the girl, that girl runs off and elopes with a duke's brother, the same duke she had previously run into while stealing something from her father's warehouse. Now, Adelaide and Henry are racing each other to find his brother and bride to be until they need to team up together. Henry has a big, dark, and scary secret that he needs to protect, while Adelaide is also trying to hide her connection to her estranged crime boss father. My favorite part of this book is that Adelaide sort of prides herself on being hidden in plain sight, but Henry has always noticed her everywhere and can't understand how anyone else could overlook her. Definitely sweet. Another book by Sarah MacLean is The Rogue Not Taken. It's book 1 of the Scandal and Scoundrel series. We start here with Sophie, who has witnessed her brother in law having a tryst at a garden party with someone who is definitely not her sister. So she pushes him into a fountain and causes a scandal. As she runs away from the party, she hops into a carriage and somehow ends up leaving the city with a scandalous Marquess. They're sort of trapped together along the road, get separated for a bit, reconnect, and it's just one calamity after another, including a gunshot wound at some point. This one is the ultimate in things could go wrong in a road trip, and so this is probably one of my favorites of Sarah MacLean's. Next, we have A Perilous Flirtation, the third and final book of the Love Locks of London series by Felicity Niven. You can read this one on Kindle Unlimited. So, the youngest Lovelock sister, Arabella, has met Dr. Alistair Andrews, our doctor friend from book 1, once for about 10 minutes, and they're both instantly smitten with each other. Trouble is that the good country doctor thinks he's not good enough for the young and pretty heiress, so he does not make any move at all. After a year or so, she's pretty sure he's not interested, and so she enjoys the attentions of another man. Unfortunately, that man was taking advantage of her youthful naivete and left her ruined and in a complete scandal. Running away from the scandal, she sets up a new life for herself in Scotland and doesn't let anyone know where she is. Meanwhile, Alistair finally works up the nerve to ask after Arabella, and Arabella's sister tells him that she left them all after the scandal. 2 years pass, and Alistair is in Scotland to visit his ailing mentor, and Arabella's sister has asked him to locate her and bring her home. After that, we get a whirlwind road trip, snowstorm, shelter at a fancy lord's house during a winter house party, and then pretending to be married to preserve their reputations. I mean, what could go wrong? I love how they were both quietly pining after each other the whole time, and poor Alistair was just so self conscious and unsure of himself and unsure of his worth. Luckily, Arabella's impatience helps push him quite a bit, and that fancy lord's house party is full of drama. The Lord I Left by Scarlett Peckham is book 3 of the Secrets of Charlotte Street series. I will start by saying this book has is a lot less mainstream than the others in the list. I would say it's more explicit and grittier than the happy, brightly colored books that I often talk about. The central setting for this series involves a BDSM club in London, and the heroine in this book has been a maid at the club and now is apprenticing to be a whipping governess. She's being called home to see her ill mother and needs to travel through the winter weather. Henry, who is a minister, is working on governmental reform on prostitution houses and dens of sin. He's in the process of writing a report and has visited the house for research. Now, this man is terribly pious and thinks that he's always doing the right thing in refusing pleasure and enjoyment of any kind. I think he doesn't even take sugar in his tea. Somehow he's feeling chivalrous towards Alice, even though he looks down on her and decides to escort her to her mother's house. She, of course, doesn't like him because of his extremely moral and religious stance on pleasure and prostitution. Of course, along the way, they start to talk and somehow see each other's point of view a little, but it's a bit of a stretch for me. There's a huge amount of shame being piled onto Alice here from Henry, from her family, from society, even though she's confident in her own position and desires. And lastly, I'll talk about In Which Margot Halifax Earns Her Shocking Reputation by Alexandra Vasti. This is a novella and book 1 of the Halifax Hellions series. You can get this one for free from the author's website. So, Margot is a scandalous young lady known for causing trouble with her twin sister. When her twin has eloped with a much older man, Margot seeks out the calm and steady Henry, another Henry, her brother's solicitor friend, to assist her in chasing her down. Of course, Henry has been in love with Margot forever and knows it's a bad idea to be in close proximity to her, but he goes anyway. This is a steamy road trip romance that's a pretty quick read, and I highly recommend it. So, overall, that's a dozen road trip romances to add to your TBR. Thank you so much for watching this video. Links to all of the books I've discussed are in the description box. Like and subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and you can follow me on Instagram at randomolive.